The moment did not begin with politics. It began with a story. In a quiet hall filled with diplomats, cameras, and restrained applause, the atmosphere was formal, almost cold. Yet within minutes, something unexpected happened. A nation thousands of miles away from Eastern Europe reached straight into the heart of a wartime president. And by the end of it, the Ukrainian president was visibly moved, struggling to hold back tears. This is the story of how the Philippines, a country shaped by colonization, war, resilience, and faith, delivered a message so human, so raw, that it cut through protocol, geopolitics, and power. To understand why this moment mattered, we need to understand both sides of the story. Ukraine, a nation scarred by invasion, has endured years of conflict, displacement, and loss. Cities reduced to rubble, families torn apart, children growing up to the sound of sirens instead of lullabies. Leadership in such times hardens a person. Presidents learn to speak in strategy, numbers, and survival. Emotions are often buried because there is simply no time to feel. On the other side of the world sits the Philippines, a nation with a long memory of suffering. Colonized for centuries, battered by war, natural disasters, and political struggle, Filipinos carry a cultural DNA built around endurance. Pain is not unfamiliar here. Loss is not theoretical. It is remembered through grandparents' stories, church prayers, and national scars. When the Philippines spoke to Ukraine, it did not speak as a superpower. It spoke as a survivor. The message was not aggressive. It was not loud. It did not demand. Instead, it reminded. It reminded Ukraine that suffering does not erase dignity. It reminded the world that pain does not strip a nation of its soul. And it reminded the Ukrainian president that he was not alone. As Filipino representatives spoke, they drew parallels that were impossible to ignore. They spoke of invasion, of being outmatched, of standing against forces far greater than oneself. They spoke of cities destroyed, civilians caught in the middle, and leaders forced to carry the weight of an entire nation's hope on their shoulders. But then the tone shifted. They spoke of faith, of resilience, of how a people can be broken again and again, yet still rise. They spoke not as analysts, but as humans who understood what it meant to lose homes, to bury loved ones, and still believe in tomorrow. For the Ukrainian president, this was not another diplomatic speech. It was recognition. Recognition is powerful. In war, leaders are praised, criticized, analyzed, and judged, but rarely are they understood. In that moment, the Philippines did not look at him as a political figure. They looked at him as a man leading a wounded people. That is when his composure began to crack. Cameras captured the subtle change first. The tightening jaw, the pause between breaths, the eyes that stopped scanning the room and instead fixed on the speaker. This was no longer a performance. This was personal. The Filipino message emphasized something deeper than military aid or sanctions. It emphasized moral solidarity, the idea that even if geography separates nations, shared suffering binds them. They reminded him that the Philippines, too, once faced overwhelming odds, that history tried to erase them, that empires tried to silence them. Yet they survived. Not because they were the strongest, but because they refused to surrender their humanity. And then came the line that reportedly broke him. A simple statement acknowledging the emotional toll of leadership in war, acknowledging that strength does not mean the absence of tears. That courage sometimes looks like continuing even when your heart is breaking. In that moment, the Ukrainian president was no longer standing before allies and diplomats. He was standing among people who understood pain without explanation. Tears are often seen as weakness in global politics, but here they became proof of something else entirely: connection. The room fell quiet. No applause, no interruptions, just silence. And in that silence, something profound happened. The barriers of nation, power, and position dissolved. What remained was a shared human experience: grief, hope, endurance, and belief in survival. The Philippines did not offer pity. It offered perspective. It showed that suffering does not have to isolate, that history's wounds can become bridges instead of barriers, and that sometimes the most powerful support does not come from weapons or wealth, but from understanding. After the speech, analysts tried to frame the moment politically. Some called it symbolic. Others called it strategic diplomacy. But those in the room knew better. You cannot fake that kind of emotion. You cannot script that kind of response. It was real. For Filipinos watching, it was a moment of quiet pride, a reminder that their nation's voice still matters, that even without dominance, they can move the world through empathy. For Ukrainians, it was reassurance, that their struggle is seen not just through headlines and maps, but through hearts that recognize familiar pain. And for the rest of the world, it was a lesson. Power is not always loud. Influence is not always force. And sometimes, the strongest message comes from a country that knows what it means to suffer and still choose compassion. In a world growing colder, the Philippines reminded everyone of something ancient and essential: humanity. That is how the Philippines had the Ukrainian president in tears, not through pressure, not through politics, but through truth, memory, and shared pain. And that moment will be remembered long after the speeches fade and the cameras move on.